All right, Gowron Eyes here, and we're going to be going over some Star Trek questions. If you have any, leave some in the comments if you're on live. So the first one we got is the transporter dilemma. Is the person who materializes from a transporter the same person who left, or a perfect copy with the original's memories? If it's a copy, boy, I love multi-part questions. That's the easiest to for a first question, right? If it's a copy, does that mean the transporter is murder-suicide machine that Starfleet has been using for over a century? So I think for me, the first time I found out that a transporter was not actually transporting an actual person, but destroying them, making the copy, and sending the copy back over, I thought it was murder and suicide, and nothing has changed my mind in the many years since. I think that if you told somebody, hey, listen, you're going to fall asleep, but when you wake up, you will have been completely destroyed, but another version of you will wake up with all your memories intact. I don't think anybody would sign on for that. And I think Starfleet must do a really good job of teaching kids from a young age, like, hey, this is really 100% all you. They must tell them, even if you're not that religious, you got to be thinking, like, is it copying your soul? And they must tell these little kids, no, it's 100% you. There's no difference between you and the copy that comes out. There was a movie, probably 30 years ago, with Michael Keaton called Multiplicity, and he plays a guy that gets copied, and they're experimenting with cloning, and the first one comes out decent, and the next one comes out okay, and then there's something off about the third one, and then the more copies you make, just like if you run something off of the copy machine, the first copy is good, but if you make a copy of the copy, it gets a little lighter each time, till by the time you get to the 100th copy of the 100th copy, it looks nothing like the original. And I wonder if they've ever played around with doing that in Star Trek, because if you've gone through the transporter 1,000 times, which I'm sure you can in the course of a career, then you're pretty much just the 1,000th copy of a 1,000th copy. And I always thought, why don't they make it, if you're inventing the technology on Star Trek when you're as a writer, and you're already dealing with wormholes, and you're able to, why couldn't they create some sort of little wormhole that you're then shrinking a person and sending them through the wormhole to transport them? Like, I'd be more comfortable with that than telling me, oh, we're going to completely destroy you, make a copy of it, and reconstitute it, but trust me, it's the exact same thing. It's difficult to think that it's the same thing. I don't like this. Hold on. All right. So that's how I feel about replicators. I don't know how you feel, but like I said, maybe they have a way of educating people from a young age to tell them, yes, it's a copy of you, but it's you. But I would just feel like it's a copy, and I would rather risk getting seasick or space sick and taking a shuttle down to the surface. All right, get rid of this. Ooh, okay. All right, so replicator culture. If any food, object, or tool can be materialized instantly, what happens to the concepts of artistry, craftsmanship, and value? Is a replicated Stradivarius violin as valuable as the original? And does cuisine as culinary art form die? And I mean, I'm sure for a select few, they would probably enjoy the art form of making food I know in Strange New World, Captain Pike loves to cook. I think there's been other shows where the captains like to cook for the crew, but ultimately, it's like any other technology. If it's just easy, if it makes things easier, then why aren't you going to use it? In terms of artistry, then you have to come up with other art forms that can't be easily replicated. And you're going to lose some of the art forms that you had before they were easily be able to be replicated. That's one of those things that, technology, even now we see it, nowadays, with AI, people always said, oh, manual labor and menial tasks will be taken care of by AI, and we'll be free to create and be artistic. And the truth is, the first things that AI is doing is completely I wouldn't say it's completely taken over the artistic realm and creative writing, but it's definitely getting there really fast. And it might be the menial labor that has the last laugh with that, because that was always, the more artsy people would say, oh boy, AI is going to take over all of these other things that you wouldn't want to do, and we'll just be left to create and do all the things that a computer can't do. And it's increasingly becoming certain that creativity is not necessarily just something in the human realm. And we'll have to see if what art forms are able to rise to the top, or human art forms are able to rise to the top after AI takes over all the other artistic domains. All right. The rights of holograms. If a holographic character can achieve sentience, as seen with Dr. Moriarty, with Moriarty or the Doctor on Voyager, what are their rights? Does turning off their program constitute murder? And if they own property, can they vote or can they seek asylum? The short answer is that if they are truly sentient, as much as you or I, if we are truly sentient, then it would be murder to turn off their program. It's kind of like, if someone who considers themselves really religious is going through a really bad time, or is dying, and they say, God, how can you do this to me? It's sort of the same thing. If the hologram is created by a human and the human shutting him off, then the hologram might say, how can you do this to me? But I think it's kind of like in that episode where Data has to prove his sentience. It's how can we prove our own sentience? Especially when you consider is our world a hologram, and now science is starting to find some proof that maybe it is. So who can we really, at that point, who can you deny rights to? But that's probably not something that's going to be an issue for the next few hundred years. So, but you would hope that as they create more sophisticated AIs and more sophisticated, holograms, that's something that you would hope that they would build in those sort of legalities, to what are their rights. But more than likely they'll wait till it's an issue and it's too late and have to play catch up, like everything else. Universal translator nuance. How does the universal translator handle purely abstract or species-specific philosophical concepts that have no equivalent in another language? You're asking me. How does it translate for a species that communicates non-verbally through color shifts or scent? Well, I think color shifts or scent. If there is a species that translates through or communicates through color or scent, I'm sure you could program a universal translator to um, identify what colors and scents they're giving off and be able to translate it into another language. So I don't think that would be as much of an issue. Where they say they communicate non-verbally, I mean, if it's sort of with actions or sign language, of course, I think a universal translator could handle that. I think when they say species-specific philosophical concepts that have no equivalent in another language, then I think that it would be up to that species to somehow communicate and express those concepts for the universal translator to be able to translate it and synthesize. But that's probably not something I'm going to be able to do here in my basement, in 2025. But if I was giving them any advice for the future, that's what it would be. Let's see. The Borg and individuality. When a Borg drone is severed from the collective, they experience profound loss and trauma. Does this imply that the collective, despite its nature, offers a form of comfort, purpose, and belonging that is superior to individuality? Superior to individuality? And I think that's a really stupid question. It's no offense. Because we're saying that, so you sever the person from the Borg, and now they experience profound loss and trauma. I mean, what would you say to the loss and trauma? So you take the person before they're a Borg. I mean, forget about that person. What about the loss and trauma that you're causing their friends and family? If it's a child that's been taken by the Borg, what kind of loss and trauma are you providing to their parents? And then by severing them, it's almost like if you're saying that, being in the Borg, I would say an analog would be if you shoot somebody up with a lot of heroin, and then, now when you sever them from the heroin, it's a profound loss and trauma, So, I mean, it just seems like a silly question, that they're saying the collective is providing comfort, but that's like saying adding in, heroin is to a person, just shooting them up with heroin is giving them comfort, and by taking it away, because it's not like someone chose to be with the Borg. So, my heroin example is if you unwittingly, someone was given heroin, and now by taking it away, you're providing some kind of profound loss and trauma. So that seems like a silly question. Well, anyway, that's where I stand on it. The currency of ambition in a post-scarcity federation without money. What's the primary motivator? If not wealth, is it reputation, rank, or scientific discovery? What happens to citizens who simply lack ambition? Well, I'm guessing in that system, citizens who lack ambition would sort of lay at at a status quo type of existence. And I mean, it's saying, I think that people, once the idea is, once they have a basic level of food in their bellies, a roof over their head, clothes on their back, that they'll, kind of be working toward just sort of their own interests, and I don't think that, but definitely, like, just looking at their question, yeah, they will be going for reputation. They will be trying to get a rank, the scientific discovery, sure, maybe they'll just be doing it for the good will of man. But I think that, even going for that scientific discovery, that they're just going for, the accolades. So even if you take away the currency, there's always some kind of carrot, that they're working towards. And then this one, menial labor. Who cleans the sewers on Earth? Who collects the garbage or performs other essential, undesirable jobs in a society where everyone is encouraged to better themselves? I love this. Is such a cool question. Are these tasks automated? And if so, what happens when automation breaks? And I would love to know who wrote this question, because it's probably somebody that I don't know, maybe they don't know people who clean sewers or pick up garbage, but I think it's funny, and sad that they're saying when people are encouraged to be better, as if someone can't be, and maybe I'm just, hey, listen, I don't have a menial labor job, but I've certainly seen a lot of episodes of dirty jobs in my life, and there's definitely people can take pride in doing lots of different types of jobs, and certainly cleaning sewers or collecting garbage. I think if you just kind of just with my own brain, having a job where I can just kind of use a lot of physical energy, is important. And I think there's just like in love, when there's someone for everyone, there's certainly a job for everyone. And if whoever wrote the question might consider those jobs as something that is undesirable in a society. I love it. Undesirable in a society where everyone is encouraged to better themselves. I think you have to set the bar lower in terms of people. There's a lot of people that wouldn't be qualified to clean sewers or pick up garbage, and you know what, to be honest, there's a lot of people probably working in, let's say, academia, or in a cubicle in a building that wouldn't physically be capable to pick up garbage. So it depends on what domain you're looking at what is one, undesirable, and two, what it means to better yourself. But yeah, ultimately, they probably would have, just like I was saying with the other question, AI, where people thought, oh, AI is going to take over all the menial labor, and the first thing it's doing is taking over all the creativity jobs. But at some point, you figure robots are also going to be able to do some of the jobs that are, at the very least, dangerous. Let's see. Now we have dissent in utopia. What does political and cultural dissent look like in the Federation? Are these counterculture movements? Anti-technology communes? How does society that prides itself on perfection handle those who actively reject its ideals? Well, I think no matter what, you're always going to have cultural and political dissent, even in what you might consider a perfect society, because one, we're human, and someone's always going to have a problem with something. And especially if you have teenagers, because it doesn't matter. You could have a perfect society, and as soon as you have teenagers in the mix, they're gonna find something to complain about it and want to change it, and think they know better. So it kind of reminds me of Planet of the Apes, and you have like the teenage ape who doesn't trust the humans, and he doesn't trust the ape leadership, and Charlton Heston's just kind of laughing and recognizing probably himself as a teenager, but also just that sort of late 60s teenager who was always pretty much railing against everything. And I'm sure you would, that's not going to ever change, even in a utopia. Intellectual property. If you can replicate any book or piece of music, does the concept of copyright or intellectual property, intellectual property cease to exist? How are artists and inventors recognized and rewarded for their creations? I don't know. I mean, everybody has an opinion, their own opinion. My opinion is, how are artists recognized and rewarded? I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm reminded of, the guy cleaning a museum who tapes a banana peel to the wall, and the next day it's selling for millions of dollars. Um, so art, you know, I mean, ultimately, I mean, I could have AI right now do a perfect copy of the Mona Lisa, but that's not the Mona Lisa. So I think in, I don't think it's just like anything else we have right now. You can copy anything you want. I think it's more. It's not. I think it's more about, is the AI or robots going to be better at inventing or artistry than the humans. I don't think it's going to be, you know, yeah. In terms of IP, I think that at some point IP is going to be a thing of the past, because you're just going to be able to create anything you want, or anything that mirrors something that's um, genius. We won't be geniuses, but we'll be able to recreate genius. You know, I mean, even in my own job, when we're trying to reinvent the wheel, and you know, we always say, better to have one thief than 99 geniuses, because that will, we could just steal 99 good ideas. And I don't mean that in terms of criminality. I just mean best practices. Crime and punishment. In a society that has supposedly eliminated poverty and want, what drives crime? When it occurs, what is the philosophy behind punishment? Is it purely about rehabilitation? And does that system ever fail? Well, I think, unfortunately, that even in a utopia, we're all human. And I think there's always going to be a spectrum of behavior. And I don't think, yes, there's some crime that is motivated, by not having basic needs. But, ultimately, like I said, with that spectrum, you have your saints and your sinners. And, hopefully you fall somewhere in the middle, and a little closer to saint than sinners. But, I mean, there's unfortunately, just, evil people in the world that do unspeakable things that are not motivated at all by poverty or want, you know. And I think, you know, can they be rehabilitated? I don't know. I mean, but I don't think there will be some sort of seismic shift in how, they're dealt with in terms of the prison system. you know I mean, I guess you would hope that you'd have less of your petty crime, your muggings, and your burglary. But there's going to be crimes of passion, which is at the very least. And then, like I said, just those unspeakable evil type of crimes that they'll. I don't think that we're going to technology our way out of, unfortunately. All right, the Prime Directive's paradox. The Prime Directive forbids interference in a pre-warp culture. If Starfleet observes an asteroid on a collision course with a planet inhabited by a pre-warp civilization, is allowing their extinction the morally correct choice? Where is the line between non-interference and culpable negligence? Well, I mean, the knee-jerk reaction, if you're like a decent dude, is, yeah, just have the capability of just kind of moving the asteroid out of the way or destroying the asteroid. Why wouldn't you? You know, but I think you're thinking in terms of, you're thinking on a time scale then of just, in the moment, instead of you know, galaxical time, like, in 1,000 years, that planet might rise to a point where it enslaves an entire solar system or annihilates, a complete um, species, on another planet. And now, you have some culpability in it because you can't predict. I mean, you would figure, with AI capabilities that by then they probably could predict exactly where the culture is going to go. But, barring that, you can't predict what's going to happen. So I think that's what as I mature and think about the Prime Directive. Um, yeah, because yeah, sure, that knee jerk reaction is, yeah, get rid of the asteroid. But I think when they were crafting the Prime Directive, that was part of the dilemma. Was, if we intercede on their behalf, then now we're responsible for everything they do. So at that point, you might as well, you know, go down and completely engineer their development, which is not something that they want to do either. So, you know, as sad as it is, I think you just got to kind of let the asteroid hit. Now, if there's an asteroid about to hit us and there's an alien that can intercede, don't pay attention to that whatsoever. We won't enslave it. Look at us. There's no way we would enslave another planet or annihilate another. Yeah, don't worry about it. Yeah, save us. Let's see. Okay. Genetic engineering shadow. The Federation has a strict ban on genetic engineering due to past conflicts. But what if genetic modifications could cure an incurable disease or allow for life on a hostile planet? Is the ban holding back the natural evolution and potential of humanity? Yeah. But I mean, it's kind of the same. It's the same. I mean, a lot of these questions kind of have the same theme. And it's the Pandora's box. And once you go down that road, it's going to be hard to draw distinct lines of and protocols of what you do use it for and what you don't. And I guess that's why. I mean, and especially because of what happened with Khan and and the extraordinary humans was, we can't have anything like that again, so we need to completely, it's one of those reactions that are probably a little too overcorrecting, rather than it's like, hey, we're kind of going off the road here in the wrong direction, let's just kind of go back on course. It's like they yanked the wheel and said, we can never have this ever again, and we're going to completely, even if a kid gets it without their knowledge, we're going to completely condemn them. It seems like a little, overboard. But yeah, you would think, once you have the capability, and I know that's just Starfleet history and why they banned it, but you would figure if we ever reach that point, that's something that we're going to employ. I mean, I don't think that's something that they'll be able to contain, unless it would first have to lead to a world war and almost, completely destroy the planet, and then maybe they would, have the same reaction that Starfleet did. All right. The morality of a time cop. There really is a theme here. If you are a temporal agent from the 29th century and you must correct a timeline, are you morally responsible for the trillions and the trillions of people who now will never exist in the alternate timeline you erased? I think that if I had, like it's saying, if I was a temporal agent, I think I would have to think about, I'm not making them cease to exist. they will likely exist on another timeline, and I'm just this one out of infinite timelines. They won't exist, but I'm fixing something really bad in this timeline. But don't worry, the next timeline over, and probably the next quadrillion timelines over, they exist. And that's what I would tell myself. But sometimes you just got to tell yourself stuff to get through the day when you're a temporal cop. Time cop. The necessary evil. All right, let's see this one. How many times have Starfleet captains and admirals violated their own principles for the greater good? At what point do these compromises corrupt the very ideals the Federation claims to hold? Well, I mean, it says the necessary evil. I think ultimately you have your protocols and you have human beings that are implementing the protocols, and I think you ultimately have to trust that you have the human beings in place who can make the judgment calls, because a lot of these things are they're calling it in the field. They're not getting together and having a lot of time to decide, is this a good idea? Is this following protocol? A lot of times it's a captain who doesn't, it says and admirals, but it's usually the captains that are making, a decision with no time, and with dire consequences in the balance, and they make the calls they make, and then they either get court-martialed or they don't, but I mean, and ultimately the protocols are just, they're human, they're crafted by humans, so they certainly could be fallible. War crimes against the inhuman. What are the rules of engagement against a species like the Borg, or species 8472, which do not conform to traditional ideals of life or combat? Can you commit a war crime against a species that's trying to assimilate or annihilate you? All right, I mean, that's, can you? I mean, I don't know, that's a tough one. I mean, you would figure, it reminds me of, if you had sort of a Q-like power, and you could just sort of blink the Borg out of existence, would that be a war crime, or would you be working toward the greater good? That's a tough one. That's probably beyond the scope of my experience to give a definite answer one way or the other. What would you do? Would you annihilate the Borg? It's kind of like that one episode where spoiler alert for Next Generation, but there's a sort of godlike being that annihilates a whole species because they killed his wife. Like one ship killed his wife and he completely destroyed the entire species. That wouldn't constitute that would probably be thought of as a war crime, but to do it to the Borg, where that's just sort of their way of life and the way they kind of propagate, I don't know. We'll see if we ever have to answer those questions in our lifetimes. Interspecies compatibility. Beyond the superficial, how do wildly different species truly coexist in intimate relationships? I don't know. I don't know how people, people in my own species coexist in intimate relationships. How do you navigate a relationship with someone who will outlive you by 400 years? Or whose species communicates emotions in a way you can't perceive? Well, I think if a species communicates emotions in a way that someone else perceives, then they should that species should not really um, try to go for a relationship with the species that can't perceive their emotions. I think that's on them. Hey, hey, I wanted to be with you. You can't communicate your emotions to me in a way I can perceive. All right, that's not my fault. That's the way I would look at it. I've actually used that one before. All right, the definition of life. Starfleet has encountered silicone-based life, non-corporeal beings, and sentient starships. How has this expanded the legal and philosophical definition of life? Does every strange energy reading have to be checked for sentience before flying past it? Um, yes and no. Like, yes, you probably should, but I guess it's a matter of diminishing returns in terms of you know, if you have if you go from one solar system to many solar systems away, and you have the machine on that's checking for sentient beings the entire way, and you do 1,000 trips that way and you don't find one, then you're probably going to turn it off sometimes, and then just wait for, like, you know when they say, hey, yo, you're bumping into us or something. I don't, I would probably take a lot of ship resources to constantly be on the lookout for sentient energies that, unless they could do it in a way that didn't take up any ship resources. It just sort of was, part of a general scan that they could do that wouldn't take up a lot of energy. I don't think that that's likely to occur. Psychological. Okay, next one. Psychological toll. What is the long-term psychological impact on Starfleet officers who have seen countless planets, watched friends die, and been put in impossible moral situations, all before the age of 30? How effective is shipboard counseling really? Well, the psychological toll, I would think, is, hey, nobody told you had to sign up for Starfleet Academy. I'm sure they go through but I mean, that's, I mean, you're going to watch friends die. You're going to be put into impossible situations. You would hope that there would be some sort of pre-psychological evaluations that could weed out people that were more likely not to be able to go through all that. Um, you know, but we're only probably now coming to terms with treating PTSD in the 21st century. So you would hope by the 24th century that they would have a better way of dealing with it. So shipboard counseling, she's not a medical doctor, but I guess it helps to have the empath aboard. She was able to treat Picard when he went through his stuff with the Borg. But it's kind of, you don't have to join Starfleet, and I'm sure they make people well aware of the dangers and things that they're going to have to go through. The red shirt reality. Here's another one. The red shirt reality. Given the casualty rates on away missions, why would anyone choose to be a security officer in Starfleet? What's the recruitment pitch for arguably the most dangerous job in the galaxy? All right. Well, it's like what I tell, like, my firefighter friends or like my police friends. I say, oh, I was going to do that, but I was too scared. Ultimately, there's people, when there's a burning building, there's people that run right in, and there's people that, call 911. And, the red shirt reality is that I'm sure, in the spectrum of human behavior, you're going to find, even in the 24th century, people that, are for want of better words, dying to do that job. That might be, today's, we might call them adrenaline junkies, or, just people that, they're just that's the way they want to serve. And they, we all know those people that just, it's not that they have no fear, but they just, they're very brave, and they can kind of, push past that fear. And I don't think that would be any different in the 24th century than it is today. Cosmic time dilation. All right, let's see if I can get this one. A ship traveling at high warp for a few years experiences less time than a stationary planet. How does this affect relationships with families back home? Do you return from a 5-year mission to find your younger sibling is now older than you? Yes, you do. It's funny, I'm actually reading or rereading for at least the 4th time now. It's a book called Hyperion. And it's a series of, these people traveling on a spaceship. They all tell their story of how they got onto the spaceship. But the guy who's telling the story right now was a sailor. He got married at age 20 to a 16-year-old. It was cool, on that planet, a 16-year-old. And he has to do these missions as a sailor. He's flying, in a ship. But and he's detailing his trips home, and he goes away for about a year of his time, and when he comes back, she's aged at least sometimes 5 years, but sometimes he's away longer. She's aged 30 years. He makes a series of maybe he sees her like 5 times, and I'm up to the part now where he's 23 and she's in her 70s. But yeah, I mean that is relativity. The faster you travel, the slower time is going to go for you. And I always wonder if there's a way we can alter our own sense of time. Like if I ran everywhere, does that mean I would feel like I live longer? But I don't know. So yes, I mean that just seems like you would that would be something in the future that people are going to have to deal with, is that if you're actually doing close to the speed of light travel and then you want to come home, you're going to be revisiting a world much different than when you left it, even if only a few years have passed for you. Federation secession. What is the process for a member world to leave the Federation? I love these questions. It's not like I have a handbook on it. It's just kind of, is it allowed? What would the Federation do if a strategically important founding member, like Vulcan, decided it wanted to become independent again? Well, I mean, there would be, I'm sure, levels of diplomacy. There'd be carrot and sticks. Hey, if you leave, you're not going to have access to this. If you stay, maybe we can give you a little more of this. I mean, I'm guessing. I mean, it just seems like, probably the same as, any countries on Earth that have strategic, allegiances to each other. I don't see it would be any different in the 24th century or the 30th century. The power of Section 31. How can a clandestine, autonomous intelligence organization like Section 31 operate with impunity within a society that values transparency and law? Does its existence prove that the Federation's utopia is a facade maintained by a darker reality? And that would be an absolute yes. Section 31 would certainly not run parallel and coincide with the values, put forth by the Federation. But Section 31 would make the case that without them, the Federation would never have gotten or be able to maintain, their existence. Which is, I guess, sad. And but yes, I mean, it's like one of those things you can't have one without the other, at least in the world of Star Trek. Um, but that is sort of a darker reality to Star Trek. But you know, you just it's like we were saying it probably in some of the other questions. You just have to hope that the people that are operating it are acting in good faith and really acting in a way that is going to help the greater good, rather than just sort of, consolidating their own power. All right. Planetary governance. The Federation is made up of over 150 member planets, each with its own culture, government, and laws. How are galaxy-wide Federation laws enforced when they might conflict with local planetary traditions that have existed for millennia? That's probably a tough one. I'm guessing that, if I was laying it out, it's like, hey, you're coming into the Federation. Here's our, let's call it, here's our surface level guidelines. Is there anything in your planet's cultures that's not going to coincide with these? And if not, how can we work this out? Can we work this out? I mean, I think once they're in, then, you would hope that they would have already weeded out anything that's, not going to be complementary to how the Federation, just their traditions, and kind of their own set of laws, would it's kind of hard to say. I mean, it reminds me of what is that show? Seth MacFarlane's show. What was that show? I forget it. It's been a while since I watched it. But he had an episode or two where there's a planet who's in their Federation of planets, and they only have males. But then, they kind of find out, oh no, if there are females, they either change them over to a male right away, or, if there is a female, they shun them, and obviously that goes against the code of their particular Federation. But, they kind of need this planet to be in their Federation for security. So, and that's kind of what I was saying here. Like, you can sort of have a planet kind of on board with you, but if they're sort of hiding something in the culture that doesn't jibe with the rest of the Federation, and now you find out about it after the fact, that's probably just a major diplomatic crisis, and probably not something I'm going to be able to answer in this one question and answer segment. That's an interesting question. History and memory. In an age of perfect computer recall and holographic reenactments, does the interpretation of history die? Is history now just a set of immutable facts? And if so, how does society learn and grow from biased or complex past events? I mean, is this a Star Trek question or just a question about, now? What they always say, history is written by, those who win the wars. I think it's silly to think that, at some point, there's perfect computer recall and holographic reenactments, unless you're talking about, really a dystopian type of, Big Brother-esque life where there's cameras in every room and every street and every corner and everything's recorded, because that's kind of what they're saying. But otherwise, it's just there's still going to be some level of subjectiveness put into events and reflection on events, and the retelling of events. It's it's not like, I mean, even in the 24th century, I don't think it's ever thought that there's a camera in the sky that's completely recording the entirety of existence. So I don't think it's much different than what we experience today, and probably what they experienced in ancient Rome. And with the guy on the corner that would yell out the news every morning. All right, I think this is the last one. Don't be sad. The Q continuum's motives. What is the ultimate purpose of the Q continuum? Why do they periodically test or torment humanity? Are they bored gods, cosmic guardians with a hidden purpose, or something far stranger? I think I could take one, they are bored gods, which Q made evident in his Voyager episode. Cosmic guardians, I think that if an ascending species ever got to the point where they showed that they could be really do some kind of damage that would sort of hurt the Q's status quo, I think that they would be struck down by Q, or something. And then it says, do they have hidden purpose or something far stranger? I think that, if it's probably something far stranger, something, I mean, it's a plot device, but and something the writers didn't have to really tackle is that, Q's intelligence would be so exponentially greater than ours that, whatever motivation he had would probably not really be able to be expressed in human language, even to someone with an intellect as great as Picard. So that is 25 questions. You have any answers, put them in the comments. You have any more questions, put them in the comments, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.